So get this, it's 9:23 in the morning on June 14th, 2025, and the USS Princeton is just doing its usual thing, one of those freedom of navigation patrols in the South China Sea. Nothing too crazy, just keeping the shipping lanes open like they always do. But then their fancy radar picks up something that could have literally started World War III. There's this Chinese destroyer, a Type 052D, just sitting there about 200 kilometers away minding its own business. Then suddenly, and I mean suddenly, this thing goes from cruising at 18 knots to absolutely flying at 30 knots in less than 90 seconds. Like, who does that? Well, turns out the Americans had no clue that the destroyer's captain had just gotten a direct call from Beijing with some pretty intense orders. Intercept that US ship and make them back down. But here's the thing, Beijing was about to learn the hard way why you don't mess with the US Navy in open waters. So picture this. The Nimitz Carrier Strike Group is out there doing what American sailors have been doing best for over 75 years, keeping the world's busiest sea routes open so Chinese factories can keep shipping their electronics to places like Best Buy. They're cruising 180 nautical miles from the nearest Chinese territory, totally in international waters where about $3.4 trillion worth of trade moves through every single year without any drama. Their whole mission was like a textbook example of freedom of navigation, steady course, predictable route, clear intentions, the kind of professional behavior that shows the difference between real naval forces and just some armed boats playing Navy. Then at 9:26, the radar team finishes figuring out what they're dealing with. Yep, confirmed Chinese Navy Type 052D destroyer, and they're rating it as a moderate to high threat. Inside the USS Princeton's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer is just calmly watching this thing's course like it's no big deal. And honestly, why would he be stressed? His ship's got 122 vertical launch cells packed with enough firepower to sink pretty much any Chinese vessel in minutes. Plus, their spy radar, which is seriously one of the most powerful in the world, is showing this enemy destroyer in such crazy detail that they can basically see every little feature on it. At the speed it's going, this thing would be in weapons range in exactly 17 minutes. Now for the Chinese side, the math wasn't looking too good. Sure, their YJ-18 anti-ship missiles could cover the distance in under 4 minutes once they fired them. But here's the kicker. The Princeton's SM-6 missiles in surface mode could reach out and touch targets up to 240 nautical miles away and take them out like it's nothing. At 9:29, the captain asks what they think the Chinese ship is planning. The answer's pretty obvious. At the speed and direction it's going, it'll be in weapons range in just 14 minutes. The crew's like, hey, should we go to general quarters? But the captain's response is just pure American confidence. Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves first. And getting to that point wasn't going to be a walk in the park for the Chinese destroyer anyway. The South China Sea was absolutely packed with merchant traffic. 46 commercial ships within 50 miles, all depending on the U.S. Navy to keep those routes safe. Among them was this Singapore-flagged container ship loaded with semiconductors and a South Korean LNG tanker worth $200 million. If Beijing could somehow turn these international waters into their own personal territory, every single one of those ships would be in serious trouble. But that would mean actually defeating the U.S. Navy, which, let's be honest, no one has ever managed to do. At 9:30, the Princeton's cooperative engagement system does this instant data share with every ship in the strike group. Indications and warnings of an active CDCM site bearing 121 true 38 miles. The Nimitz, all 104,600 tons of pure American power carrying 90 of the world's most advanced aircraft, adjusts its flight operations with the precision of a Swiss watch. The destroyers Chung-hoon and Kidd slide into position around the carrier, forming this protective shield that would basically guarantee any Chinese attack would be a one-way trip to the bottom of the sea. Things get really interesting at 9:35 when the situation goes from concerning to, oh crap, this is dangerous. An E-2D Hawkeye flying at 25,000 feet and keeping an eye on everything within 400 miles spots multiple aircraft taking off from the Chinese carrier Shandong. Radar IDs them as J-15 fighters climbing fast and heading south. as if they actually had a shot at this. Here's the almost funny part. The air controllers notice the J-15s are seriously struggling to gain altitude, probably because of fuel limits from that ski jump launch system that China's so proud of. 1 minute later, the sonar team picks up the final piece of China's little plan. They detect what might be a submerged contact 80 nautical miles out. The acoustic signature matches a Type 039 diesel-electric submarine. But here's the problem for the Chinese. This thing is making as much noise as a freight train. Any submarine crew worth their salt would have been totally embarrassed. This showed that China wasn't just being aggressive. They were trying this whole multi-domain intimidation thing using seriously outdated equipment. Surface ships from the 1990s, carrier aircraft that couldn't even carry a full weapons load, and submarines so loud they might as well announce their position over the radio. It was classic bullying tactics, the kind that only works if your opponent is weak or scared. Too bad for Beijing, they just challenged the wrong navy in the wrong ocean. The US Navy had been perfecting ocean dominance since 1914, and these Chinese forces were about to get a free masterclass in why America still rules the waves. By 9:37, the USS Nimitz's flight deck explodes into that kind of controlled chaos that only American carriers can truly master. F/A-18E Super Hornets are launching from the catapults every 45 seconds. This flawless routine that Chinese carriers with their inefficient ski jumps could only dream of matching. Steam's rising from the catapult tracks as U.S. naval aviation does what it does best. Project Power. The 1st Division of Super Hornets climbs past 15,000 feet. Their AN/APG-79A ESA radars already locking onto those incoming J-15S at maximum range. The technology gap is almost unfair. The APG-79's thousands of transmit-receive modules can track dozens of targets simultaneously, while the J-15's old mechanically scanned radar just sweeps back and forth like a lighthouse, basically advertising its location to anyone who's listening. Then, the EA-18G Growlers join the party without even firing a single weapon. These electronic warfare jets are carrying ALQ-99 jamming pods that can disrupt enemy electronics from over 100 miles away. As they settle into their jamming positions, Chinese communications start falling apart. On Chinese radar screens, ghost targets begin multiplying like crazy. American fighters appear, vanish, split into groups, and merge again. What looked like 4 FA-18 suddenly becomes 12, then 20. Radar locks break and reappear over and over. The J-15 pilots are basically chasing illusions while real threats move around completely unseen. The Americans are using this formation called the Wall that they've been perfecting for decades. A defensive spread with high cover at 35,000 feet, medium at 25,000, and low at 15,000. This creates these multiple overlapping engagement zones where each fighter covers the others. No matter which way the Chinese turn, they're going to enter someone's weapons range. The Chinese formation, by contrast, stays tightly packed together, which makes sense when your outdated data links can't support spread-out tactics. They have to rely on visual contact to coordinate, making their moves totally predictable and easy to target. On propaganda posters, sure, the J-15s might look impressive, but in real combat, they're basically antiques facing 21st century warfare. At 9:43, the RC-135B rivet joint delivers some critical intelligence. This modified Boeing 707 had been circling for 6 hours, using its advanced electronic systems to record every single Chinese signal. The Mandarin-speaking linguists on board are busy translating, and one message really stands out. Dark Star confirms Chinese pilots requesting permission for aggressive maneuvers. Repeat, they're asking for clearance to buzz our ships. The Chinese are trying to escalate, but only after getting approval first. For American pilots who are trained to act fast, this is almost amusing. By the time Beijing approves anything, the situation would have shifted several times over. At 9:47, the situation gets real when the Chinese destroyer crosses a line that would have triggered instant retaliation from almost any other navy. Its Type 346A phased array radar stops its normal scanning and locks onto the USS Nimitz with fire control precision. In naval terms, this is just one step short of actually launching missiles, the electromagnetic equivalent of pointing a loaded gun at someone. Inside the USS Princeton's Combat Information Center, the reaction is immediate but totally controlled. Years of drills and countless exercises keep the crew steady, sticking to disciplined U.S. Navy procedures. The fire control lock lasts exactly 30 seconds, just long enough for the Chinese to claim they could have attacked, but not long enough to trigger U.S. self-defense protocols. It's staged aggression, but they're aiming it at the wrong Navy. The Princeton's crew records absolutely everything: timestamps, signal data, bearing information, details that would be invaluable in a real shooting war. But even after the Chinese destroyer stops its targeting lock, this whole encounter is far from over. In the air, one J-15 pilot decides to show off his recklessness, breaking from formation and diving toward an F/A-18 in what fighter pilots call a thump, a close, aggressive pass meant to intimidate. The American pilot, trained at Top Gun where such moves are just routine, simply rolls inverted and slides into the Chinese jet's 6 o'clock position. For 3 seconds, he has a perfect firing solution. His helmet-mounted display shows the J-15's engines glowing in infrared. One squeeze of the trigger and an AIM-9X Sidewinder would have ended the fight right there. He doesn't squeeze. Professional discipline holds. The moment passes, but the Chinese still have one more move up their sleeve. At 2:30 p.m., the USS Nimitz launches absolutely everything that can fly. 48 aircraft roar off the deck in the largest single-carrier show of force in years. Super Hornets armed with live weapons, EA-18 Growlers carrying electronic warfare systems powerful enough to black out an entire city, E-2D Hawkeyes taking command of the skies with unmatched surveillance capabilities. The afternoon sky literally darkens under this swarm of American aircraft. The Growlers strike first, their ALQ-99 jamming pods running at full power, turning Chinese radar screens into complete chaos. False targets flood the displays by the hundreds, while real aircraft just disappear into this wall of electronic noise. The Shandong's air defense picture now looks like someone threw paint across the screens. Every blip a possible threat, but none they can actually confirm. The sub's commanding officer orders an emergency surface purely for dramatic effect. She breaks through the waves like a breaching whale, water pouring off her hull in the afternoon sun. Chinese crews get a perfect view and plenty of time to take photos of undeniable American dominance. After about 90 seconds, long enough to be seen, photographed, and reported back to Beijing, she slips quietly back beneath the surface. The message is unmistakable. The U.S. absolutely owns the undersea battlefield. In the skies, American fighters start showing off their air combat maneuvering skills against increasingly desperate Chinese pilots. The J-15s, already running low on fuel after those ski jump launches and steep climbs to altitude, just can't match the Americans turn for turn. Every single dogfight ends the same way. U.S. fighters in perfect firing position, Chinese fighters stuck on defense and burning through what little fuel they have left. One by one, the Chinese jets break off and head back to the Shandong on nearly empty tanks. Their combat endurance has been completely drained in these failed attempts to keep up. Many land with emergency fuel levels, some probably seeing that bingo warning light in real life for the first time outside a simulator. By 4:23 p.m., the Shandong's carrier strike group starts to withdraw. The official Chinese statements claim they had just completed some scheduled exercises, but honestly, everyone knows the real truth. They came out there to show off Chinese naval power, to intimidate lawful navigation, and to stake some kind of claim over waters that aren't even theirs. Instead, they got this crystal-clear lesson in why the South China Sea is often called America's sixth Great Lake. Bye for now.